Hi, this is Mike from BandLab. With BandLab's included instruments and effects, you can make any kind of music you like. In this video, we'll show you how to make a pluggnb beat with laid-back chords, evocative leads, and big bass. You can open this project yourself with the link in the video description. And if you find this guide useful, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to be the first to know when new videos drop. I start by setting the project tempo to 150 beats per minute, and the project key to F minor. I begin by making an instrument I can compose a chord progression with. I create a new virtual instrument track and set it to synths, FM keys. I set this track to -10.5 dB. I compose a chord progression that plays F minor 7 in the second inversion, E flat major 7, C minor 7, and B flat major 7. I'd like to add some stereo width and movement to the sound, so in the effects panel I add a modulation chorus ensemble effect. I'd also like a subtle reverb effect on the sound to make it feel more natural. I add a reverb, studio reverb, and turn the mix down to 24%. Now I'm going to make a drum part. I make another virtual instrument track and set this one to drum pads 808. I set this track to -14 dB. I sequence closed hats on 16th notes. I duplicate them out to fill out the whole bar. To duplicate notes or clips in BandLab, hold Option on Mac or Alt on Windows and drag them over. To give this sound a touch of movement, I add a modulation little rock effect. I add another instrument track, again setting it to 808. I set this track to -3 dB. I sequence claps on the third beat of each bar. I add kicks on the 1st, 8th, 11th, 17th, 24th, 25th, 26th, and 27th eighth notes. These kicks are pretty bassy, and I'd like to add a separate 808 bass line. This will clash with the kicks, so in the effects panel, I add a tone multi-filter effect. I set its mode to high pass and the frequency to 125 Hz. Next, I'd like some snares. I open BandLab Sounds, select the One Shots tab, and enter Trap Snare into the text search field. I think Trap Snare 4 sounds suitable, so I create a sampler track and drag the sample onto the first sample pad. I set this track to -3 dB. I sequence the snare on the 2nd, 10th, and 16th eighth notes. I duplicate this out to fill the 4-bar clip. Now it's time to add that bass. I add an instrument track and set it to 808's rumble bass. I sequence a bass line that follows the root note of the chords. Now I'd like to add a reverse piano sample. In BandLab's Sounds, I select the Loops tab, then set the instrument filter to keyboard and the genre filter to hip-hop trap. I drag Damage 142 G minor keys 07 4 bars into the project. I set the track to -4.8 dB. I'd like to thin this sound out and give it more movement. In the Effects panel, I add a studio reverb, setting the mix to 47% and the size to 19%. I then add a modulation phase 72 effect, setting its speed to 1.4. Next, I add a multi-filter, setting it to high pass mode and putting the frequency at 1500 Hz. This takes out the low end of the sound. I then add another multi-filter, this time leaving it in low pass mode, and setting the frequency to 2000 Hz. This takes out the high end of the sound. I feel like this track could do with some synth leads. I add an instrument track and set it to leads, G-Funk Sine. I set this track to -5.3 dB. I compose a melody that plays F, E flat, F, E flat, then F, E flat, G, E flat. In the Effects panel, I add a delay, ping pong delay, turning the mix down to 15% to make the effect more subtle. I then add a studio reverb. I add another instrument track, this time setting it to synths, heart keys. I sequence a part that plays F, E flat, C, E flat, B flat, E flat, C. I'd like this part to sound more ethereal, so in the Effects panel, I add a studio reverb, setting the mix to 96% and the size to 13%. I then add a phase 72, setting its speed to 3.1. I then add a multi-filter, setting it to high pass mode with a frequency of 450 Hz. For the arrangement, I begin with the drums and keys. On bar 9, the bass drops. On bar 17, the reversed piano sample is added. I add the first lead synth on bar 25. I add the second lead synth on bar 33. On bar 41, the reverse piano drops out. On bar 49, the kick, clap, and second lead leave the mix. On bar 57, we have an outro consisting of the keys and first lead synth. Remember, you can fork this project and make your own version of it using the link in the video description. Have fun!